Hello, everyone. Welcome to day 5. Happy Friday. It's the final day of our LEAP Assessment Bootcamp. My name is Kellie. I'm the Director of Instructional Strategy here at Schoology, and it's April. Assessment is on the brains of many, so we decided to take some time out this week to walk through some different things about assessments, everything from creation to strategies around managing that content and even delivering. So we've had 5 days so far, and we'll recap that briefly in just a minute. But we hope this bootcamp week has really left you with some good ideas that you can take back with you as you start working with assessments back in your school or district. Like we have asked every day, we've got a poll. So I'm going to post that real quickly. The question we have today, since we are doing a demo today, we just want to know, actually, do you already have an assessment management solution or not? So I'm going to leave that up for just a minute or two. If you could go ahead and vote, and I will share the results. Okay, we've got about almost 70% of folks who have let us know, kind of where they are with any kind of a management platform for assessments. I'll go ahead and close the poll and kind of share what everyone kind of voted for. So what we're looking at is, looks like we've got some folks that are AMP users already, which is great. About 25% that have something else in place, and then 53% that don't really have anything in place currently, and some folks that just aren't sure. That's fine. This is actually just kind of a good way to just kind of find out what's out there. So I also want to make sure that we talk about some things that we've talked about previously, but know that today is really going to be a deep dive really into what the assessment management platform looks like inside of Schoology. So Monday, we talked about assessment basics, and we really went through some of those kind of basic definitions, formative versus summative, and then some things we should think about when trying to match learning targets to different assessment methods, and making sure that you're really thoughtful about having a blueprint about your assessment strategy before you even give those assessments, especially those that are built in common. Day 2, we talked about building a balanced assessment system, so taking that idea of formative and summative and kind of taking that into a different area, where we also talked about the balanced assessment of having teacher-constructed assessments versus those that might be provided by some third-party question banks. Day 3, we talked about managing digital assessments, both in terms of the settings you can have inside of a course assessment in our case, and then also how you could use something like Respondus, who's one of our partners, to really use a lockdown browser to help keep the test integrity intact. Yesterday, we talked about student data for insights and continuous improvement, and today we're going to do a step-by-step walkthrough of how our assessment management platform works. So today, we're going to hear actually from one of our sales team guys who's going to go through and really kind of explain those different aspects of what assessment management means when we're talking about what's inside the Schoology platform. I am joined by Zach Davidson, our Solutions Director of Schoology. And Zach, if you could just say a couple of words about who you are, how long you've been with Schoology, and what you're most excited about in terms of AMP.
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning to some, I'm assuming as well. Zach Davidson here with Schoology. Really excited to be here and to walk you through a brief demonstration of our Schoology AMP platform. Just to give you some background on myself, I've been with Schoology for about 5 years. I'm born and raised in New York, but about 3 years ago now, I've actually moved down to Atlanta, Georgia. So residing here in the South, really excited, as I mentioned, to show you guys how not only to use the platform, but the benefits of it, right? More so from the standpoint of having a singular platform and understanding not only where your students are, but responding to that directly in the same place where the teaching and learning already exist.
Okay, great. Thanks, Zach.
No problem.
So when we look at the what we talked about already, I said we're going to do a recap of our assessment bootcamp we had this week, and then one of the things that Zach's going to walk through was kind of 3 different stages of how we actually approach AMP, which is building, managing, and measuring. And then we'll have some time for Q&A at the end. But don't forget that there's a chat area on the side of your screen where if you want to post a question, we have folks looking over that area, monitoring it kind of on the background. So we'll answer those questions as they come up as well. And if there's some that we think we need to really highlight for all, we'll make sure that we bring those up so that everybody gets to hear the question and the answer. So the recap. I think probably the most important thing to think about when we think about what we talked about for literacy for assessments is knowing your purpose. That's probably the biggest takeaway we wanted people to think about, is thinking about your why. And then also being sure that you're aligning to learning objectives when you are building an assessment, because part of the power of Schoology is the way that it can actually capture that mastery data in the mastery reports area. But that can only happen if we're aligning assessment items, or any items actually, to learning objectives and standards that are in the system. And the other thing that I really want to point out, and this is something we brought up yesterday, we have an existing like test quiz functionality that's inside of Schoology now, and that's what most people have been using. But we also have a new course assessments tool, and the course assessments tool actually is something that is a new assessment item that will be basically sent into the system, and some folks are actually using it currently. So, one of the things that is important to realize is that we will still have our assessment test quiz function in there for the next school year. So you'll have that for 18-19. And I apologize about my screen not being shared. A lot of you saw the poll for a long time there. The course assessments that are going to take over for test quiz, though, are going to be something that they're worth exploring. But we had some confusion as we talked this week about what is test quiz versus course assessments versus assessment management. So everyone knows test quiz, I'm going to assume, because that's the one that's been there. Course assessments has technology enhanced questions, and that's one of the things that makes that really kind of a robust assessment tool. But some things that it does, it's really designed for the individual course and for a teacher to give an assessment out to just their section, or even maybe multiple sections if they have, let's say they have maybe one prep, but they have 4 different sections that they teach. If you want to copy a course assessment, you can copy that to the course you have. But currently, you really are stuck with just kind of using that copy feature. And then once you copy it, you can then adjust, obviously, if you need to change questions in another section. The data is really kind of siloed within that core section. So while you can do some things like exporting, eventually into test quiz you can export now, you still are really looking at just that classroom's assessment data. It's not really a broader picture in terms of assessments that are being given maybe across multiple sections. So like I said, it's really ideal for the individual teacher. If we talk about the assessment management platform, that's really designed for common assessments. So if you want to think about it, think course versus common. So if you're in a district that's actually using something like PLCs, or you have data teams, or you have teachers working collaboratively to build assessments, that's really where AMP is designed to actually fit perfectly. So you actually have assessment teams, and Zach's going to go through this, where you actually build the content first, and then you manage the settings of that assessment centrally, so that way you keep your kind of test settings that you would normally adjust in the course itself. We want to keep those standard, because if we're giving something in common, we want to make sure that everyone has the same experience. You can also send an assessment to multiple sections at once. So this is really fantastic if you're looking at like something like a broad summative assessment. My previous district, we used AMP to actually deploy a final exam for Algebra 1. So I sent that out to over 200 sections for them all to get that same assessment inside of Schoology. The other thing you can do with assessment management in terms of the AMP platform is you can view that data across multiple sections, courses, and schools. Now the teacher is still going to see the data that is available for them to see if that's enabled. They won't see anybody else's, but this does allow someone like a data director, an assessment and evaluation coordinator, content coordinators to get a better picture of how things are happening and performing across the system, or if you're a PLC, seeing how students did just in those multiple sections where that's been pushed out. So again, these are ideal for common assessments. All right, so that being said, let's check out Schoology's AMP. I'm going to actually turn the reins over to Zach if you're ready.
I am. Okay. Perfect. Wonderful. So thank you for that introduction again, Kelly. And for the folks on the line, what we're really going to do today is just simply walk through the platform and the benefits of the importance of pushing this directly into the platform, into the LMS in itself, right? Where a majority of folks that are already using the learning management system, you're understanding this is where the teaching and learning already exists. Your students, your teachers are very much used to the workflows already within Schoology, and it really does make the experience of taking and completing common assessments that much easier and less stressful as well. So as you can see here, I'm logged in as Adam Admin. And as the admin here, I'm going to have the ability to basically, as Kelly already mentioned, build, manage, and measure common assessments that are being pushed out throughout the entire district. Okay, so as you can see here, what I'm going to do as the administrator, I have the ability to create these assessment teams. Now, they can be parsed out by grade level or subject area, what have you. And as a part of those teams, I have the ability to create the actual questions themselves and the common assessments that can be seen and shared throughout the entire district. Okay. So when it comes to the building of questions within a common assessment, one thing we understand is that when it comes to high quality data, there has to be high quality content. And so one thing Schoology has done very recently is actually partnered with an industry leading item bank platform called Key Data Systems, or KDS for short. And what we're doing with this partnership is allowing you as a school district to identify grade levels and out of the 4 core content areas, the subject areas that would be most relevant to you, and actually providing item banks and pre-built assessments that can be readily available within the platform on day one for you and your district to utilize. Okay, now there's a power in that because once again, these questions are vetted. They're also tagged directly to your state standards and Common Core. And so they're readily available for you to pull into an assessment to push into your courses throughout the district. At the same time, we do want to provide you the ability to leverage your teachers and your experts in your district to actually build questions from directly within the platform. And as Kelly has already mentioned, we provide the standard questions that you guys are very familiar with already, the multiple choice, true, false, so on and so forth. But we also provide technology-enhanced question types into the platform. So things like shared passage, labeling and highlighting, math short answers, formulas, and charts. I'll run through a couple of these questions just so you guys get a look and feel for them. I know there are some that are very much used to these question types already. And for the others, we'll be introducing them in just a couple of minutes. The beauty of, again, the AMP platform and having these assessment teams is that those folks within the assessment team, whether 5 or 15 or 50, those folks have the ability in a protected environment to continuously work on the content that they're building for these high stakes assessments. So as you can see here, with any new question that is built out within the AMP platform, we're actually going to provide a status bar, if you will, for those questions. So as you can see here, every initial question that is built is going to have a draft status, right? At any point in time, whether it's one or multiple people within that assessment team evaluating the questions, once we do so and deem that it has been worded correctly, or it's tagged to the correct standards and has the right imaging, we can always then make that question active. Okay, so in essence, we can be working within a bank on 200 questions, but only 40 of them are actually marked active. When I go to create an assessment, I'm only going to have access to those active questions. And at the same time, as you continue to use these questions year over year, semester over semester, there may come a time where you want to retire questions from future use. You can easily do so by retiring it here. The beauty is you're not deleting or archiving any of the student performance data aligned to the question, right? So you'll always have access to that. And as always, with any question that you're building within the platform, you'll have the ability to tag that to learning targets, standards, and learning objectives. Whether that is, again, your Common Core, your state standards, which are already present within the platform, or any custom learning objectives that you want to import into the Schoology LMS to provide and tag your questions to as well. And so as we continue to build out questions, obviously the workflow is to build the questions and pull them into an assessment so that they can really, be pushed, directly into those courses. So we're talking about the building piece here, right, of the assessments. Now let's focus on managing the actual assessment itself, just to showcase what that looks and feels like. Kellie had mentioned earlier in the conversation about controlling and managing all of the settings when building an assessment in itself. Here within the platform, we're going to provide you at that assessment team level the ability to control all of the settings in terms of attempt limits, randomizing the order, time limits, so on and so forth. As you can see, there are multiple settings here that you can maneuver for each assessment. Now, one thing that is key is that there are different groups of students within your school district, and we understand that. So maybe you want a specific set for a majority of the students in terms of the settings that you see here, but for another set of students, maybe students that are in a particular group, like a SPED group, for instance, we can provide the ability for you to have version control. So I can create a second version of the same assessment and provide a different set of settings as well. Okay, so it makes it very simple and easy to manipulate that directly from within the platform. Now, when it comes to distribution and the management of the distribution of these assessments, we try to make that as easy as possible here as well. So taking this learning module as an example, I simply have the ability here to identify the school buildings or subject areas, the grade levels, to filter out the courses that I want to push this particular assessment to, right? So as you can see, I can filter by multiple aspects here, whether it's the school building, the course name, the instructor's name even. I can say, show me all the math classes at the 9th grade level. And when I click search, it's going to pull all of those courses. And once I confirm it, that assessment goes directly from the assessment team to those individual courses in itself. So just to showcase what that looks and feels like, what I'm going to do now is hop in as Tracy Teacher. And as Tracy Teacher, she's one of the teachers at the high school at the Forefront School District here. And she teaches U.S. history. And she has the ability to basically manage on her end where that benchmark assessment lies within her course. We talked earlier in the process about the building of the assessment in itself and the managing of it. We'll hear from the teacher's perspective. There's a couple of things that I can even do to manage this benchmark assessment. So the two things that I want to focus on from a management standpoint from the teacher's end is, one, the availability of that assessment. So as you can see here, I can maneuver for each one of my sections a completion date for that assessment. I can say, I'm going to have them take it at a particular time period or even between a set time, right? So next Monday between 8 and 10 a.m. as an example. And I can do that for each one of my students. As you can see here, this is a brand new feature that Schoology just implemented recently, and that's the ability to actually create and manipulate a password for the students to actually access the assessment in itself. So once again, we're still and consistently building out the platform. The other piece that I want to talk to is the actual management of the weight of that assessment towards the gradebook. So as an individual teacher, maybe I want this counting towards a particular grading category within my gradebook. I can manipulate that, right? So maybe a final exam or a midterm at the end of the middle of the year or middle of the semester, I want to push this out and make it available to my students, and it's going to count 25% towards the overall grade. At the same time, maybe it's a benchmark assessment or some sort of placement exam, and I don't want that counting at all to the grade. So while the reports all go to myself, the principals, the district, I don't have to make it accountable, if you will, towards the grade within the grade book. Okay. Now, what I'm going to do here is actually hop in the platform just for a second as a student. We talked a lot about those technology-enhanced questions, and I'm sure that for a lot of folks within the webinar today, you have seen some of those questions, those new tech-enhanced question types that we've provisioned in the platform. There are some, however, that this will be your first time, so I just want to walk through some of those questions just so you can get a look and feel. And as I do, think about, obviously, how you can use these questions in multiple grade settings and grade level subject areas across the board. So I'm hopping in here as Sally's student, who's a student in in Tracy Teacher's U.S. History course. And once again, these are just some examples here. I'm not going to go through each one of the questions. I'm sure we're all familiar with the standard question types that Schoology provides, but just want to give you some examples of some of these new tech-enhanced question types that we've developed. So first up here is our highlight text question type. In this example here, as the student, I have the ability to highlight a full sentence with one click of a button. We provide a ton of functionality where I can drag over multiple words or highlight one particular word as an individual response if need be. And think about this as well. With our technology-enhanced question types, one thing that teachers always think about when they think of tech-enhanced questions is, there's more labor on the teacher's end, right? And one thing that we're really excited about is providing a majority of these tech-enhanced questions for the teachers, for the instructors, for the assessment team to build out, but also providing automated grading. So unless I do call it out, please make note that all of these questions can be automatically graded as well. I'm going to jump ahead here just to showcase a couple of these other question types. This is probably my favorite new question type that we've added to the platform. It's called our highlight image question type. And what it does is allow you to actually draw directly on the image in itself, right? So in this example, I'm showing the trek of Lewis and Clark, and I can use multiple colors if need be. And think about, again, how you can use this for multiple classroom settings. I've had math teachers say that they've uploaded images of notepads and had their students draw directly on the notepad to show their work. One of the key pieces about this particular question type, it does require manual grading, this particular question. And with that, as a teacher, when I go to grade this question, not only do I see the flat file of all the work that's been done, but I actually can review this as a teacher, as an instructor, as a video in sequential order. This way, I can literally pinpoint exactly where my student went right or wrong on that particular assessment question. That is a very, very powerful tool, particularly from the math side of things, if you think about it, right? Math teachers are usually the most reluctant to use online assessments because of the inability to actually showcase the work. This particular question type is aligning directly to that and allowing the teachers to identify all the progressions that the student makes along that particular question. So we're really excited about that. Next up here, and excuse the image, but this is our label image question type. What it does is allow you to upload an image, and in the authoring section, you have the ability to create these open response areas where need be along that image. So in this example here, obviously a biology type of question, I'm simply asking the students to identify the organs and such directly within this image. So the student comes in and can simply drag and drop their response right along this image here. And once again, this can be automatically graded. And you can think about how we can use this particular question type in multiple settings, right? Next up here, going to jump ahead to our highlight image. Very similar in terms of the workflow from the authoring end. I upload an image here, but instead of having those open response areas, I can create areas for highlighting, okay? So think about maybe even in a biology class, right, where I have a picture of a heart and I want the student to identify the left aorta. In this example here, I'm simply asking the student to identify the area where I would find a carnivorous forest. And the student just simply, once again, clicks directly on that image to create their response. Okay. Next up here is our math short answer question type. This is really cool as well. What this does is allow you at the authoring level to provision one or multiple calculators for the student to respond with. And Schoology has provided, I think it's about 14 or 15 different calculators within the platform that you can provision as on that assessment team, okay? And as you can see here, I'm just running through just to showcase how easy it is from the student perspective to actually create these number sentences. Okay, it is very simple, very easy to manipulate. Superscripts, exponents, square roots, the whole gamut. And once again, there are multiple calculators that you can use. This is just a basic, but whether it's a primary or elementary level or that calculus class, we have different calculators to attribute to those math settings. And then finally here, probably our most requested question type. This is our shared passage question type. And in this example here, I have a passage on the left that the student reviews, and then aligned questions on the right, okay? And you can have different types of questions that are aligning to the passage, whether it's multiple choice, as you can see here, a short answer response, things of that sort. Fill in the blank matching. This is just another example from a math setting, right? So once again, these are a lot of the new question types that we've built out in the platform and provided you the ability to use directly within your school district to really promote that engaging experience for the student. When we think about it, and when we've done the research on our end, I'm sure everyone on this call can agree. When really trying to measure depth of understanding from the student perspective, it's so much better to do so with these questions that the student can actually interact with in a digital response versus that, A, B, C, or D, true or false, so on and so forth. So we're really excited, and the feedback that we've received from our school districts that we're already partnering with AMP is very positive and very, really exciting to hear. So what happens now once, your students have actually completed these assessments, right? This is the meat and potatoes of the AMP platform, the actual reports in itself. And we're really going to dive in and take a look at what we have the ability to showcase to you guys, and also what you would have the ability to see further down the line as well when it comes to our roadmap. I mentioned earlier in the conversation how this is just the beginning, and we're really looking forward to providing even more of a detailed experience when it comes to reports and such, which I'll also detail in a couple of minutes here. But what you're seeing here is a report for a particular benchmark assessment that was completed by the students within my school district. So this is a high-level overview, almost like a view from 30,000 feet of everything that's important to you as an administrator. Now, I'm back here as admin, but I do want to make note that this report, you can manage as an administrator who gets to see and what they get to see when it comes to these reports, right? So maybe as a district administrator, obviously you wanted a report reflecting the scores and data against every single student across multiple buildings within your school district. You can provision that responsibility and that permission to every single user and all roles within the district as well, but you can also limit that depending on what's best for your school district. So what I mean by that, there might be a principal in a particular campus and you want them to have access to this report, but not for all students across multiple campuses. So they can have the ability to see the report based on the students within their school building. Even for a teacher, maybe I do want access to this report, or I want my teachers having access, but I don't want them having access to, let's say, all 116 students within the district, so they only are going to see the 20 students in their class or their course sections that have actually taken the assessment. Okay, so once again, diving back here into what you're looking at. Really, again, this is a bird's eye view of everything that's important. The graph on the left is item performance or item analysis graph. So in this example here, what we're showcasing is that against this particular benchmark assessment, there were 11 questions. Now, Schoology defines high, medium, and low performing questions. Okay, so high performing questions are those in which more than 3/4 of the students get the question correct, versus low performing students in which less than half the students get the question correct. Okay, so we'll dive into that and we get this 3-column layout that explains to us where the students are as a whole in terms of the average score against each individual question. I can dive into those questions and review them individually, right? So starting off with that first low performing question here, what I have the ability to do is understand the item type, right? This was a multiple choice question, review the question in itself and see any learning objective that is tagged directly to that question. Then I'm going to get this 3-tabbed item analysis report that showcases the average score, success rate, and item discrimination score. Now, to briefly define these 3 tabs here and what they really mean. The average score in itself, you can see that the number here is exactly the same. The difference between the average score and the success rate is that the average score is going to take into consideration any sort of partial credit that is aligned to the response, versus the success rate, which is only going to showcase the percentage of students that got the question 100% correct. So what do I mean by that? In this example here, the correct response, as you can see, was the letter A, right? But there may be multiple choice questions where the correct response is A and D. If the student only scores A and automatically gets half credit, that would be reflected in the average score. Versus, once again, the success rate, which is only going to showcase the students and percentage of the students that got the question 100% correct. Now, the item discrimination score. We provide 3 scores, poor, fair, and very good. Okay, and really what this is an algorithm that we developed that basically shows a correlation between the student response on this individual question and how that correlates to their overall performance on the assessment. If there is any sort of breakdown in that correlation, we'll provide a poor item discrimination score. And really what that is for you as an assessment team is really just a quick alert to review the question in itself. This might be a question that for whatever reason might be ambiguous to a group of students, or maybe there's just simply a misspelling, right? So we want to provide that alert system for you because, again, we understand that for a lot of the common assessments that you're pushing out, particularly at a benchmark and summative level, these are assessments that you're pushing out year over year, semester over semester. So we want to help you to ensure that the content that you're providing is of the highest quality. And then as I scroll down here, I'll have the ability to review the responses at a broad basis and then see individual student responses as well. Okay. And we can do that for each and every question. But for the sake of time, we're going to hop out here and talk a little bit more about the student scores. So to the right, what I'm showcasing is the average score at the top here. That's 79.7 across 116 students throughout the district. Okay, and then of course, as you can see here, I have that breakdown in terms of the score ranges and the number of students that fall within them. Now, it's one thing for me to identify that the average score is roughly an 80% across all students in the district. That's great, but it's also just as important, if not more, for that district administrator, that principal, to identify how subgroups within the school district are also performing as well. So one thing that we're really excited about is the ability for Schoology to actually partner with you as an individual school district, for you to identify back to us which demographic attributes and subgroups are most relevant to your school district. Now, what I have listed here, these are just examples. Okay, so things like race, ethnicity, economically disadvantaged, students with disabilities, English as a second language. We have some districts that really want to identify and understand how military students are performing. You, again, have the ability to identify directly to us those subgroups that are relevant. We will actually pull them in through a bulk import from your student information system or any sort of data warehouse where these data points belong, so that you as a administrator can come in here and run a report based on those subgroups and those demographic attributes. So as an example here, showcasing how the students across various ethnicities in my district are performing. Obviously, as you can see here, anything marked in red is lower than the class average. Anything marked in green is above that class average. Okay, so that's one way to understand how the demographics and the subgroups within your division and within your school district are performing. I'll also showcase what that looks like on an individual basis as well. And that brings me directly back to this report here, where we're actually going to view each one of the students individually across the district. So this overall results dashboard, this is going to provide you the ability to understand how each one of my students within that school district is performing against that individual benchmark assessment. Now, there's a couple of things I can do with this dashboard and with this report. Maybe I quickly just want to identify the students that are at risk, right? So I can change the score range and apply that, and it's going to showcase all of those students directly here within the platform. And once again, maybe I want to individually message the parents as a principal, as a teacher. I can easily do that because this is all happening in the LMS in itself. Okay. At the same time, maybe as a district, I want to only see the students that belong to a particular school building. Okay, so I can easily do that. And when I apply that there, it's going to showcase those 45 students, if you will, that belong to Adams High School. Okay, the same can be done for each individual section. So as a teacher that teaches 5 different sections of U.S. history, maybe I want to identify a particular section. I can easily do so. I can, once again, looking at the teachers here and the instructors, I can do the same exact thing for them. So I might only want to see how Chris Benjamin students are performing. Boom, I get access to that right here within the platform. Another piece here is when we talk about the demographic attributes, right? We showcased how we can show that average score, but maybe I just want to identify on an individual basis how students within a particular subgroup are performing on an individual basis as well. This is the ability to identify that and pull that data very quickly and easily from within the platform. Now, this is showcasing that individual response, right? Now, there might be the ability for, or the need, if you will, for a teacher to understand how the sections are performing at a broad basis. So instead of seeing those individual students in section 101, I just want to see the average score for each one of my sections. This helps me, as you can see here in this example, I'm going to identify that there's a little bit of a struggling area with my section 103 class. What's the reason for that? Maybe I can identify that early on and really try to bolster my students' proficiency in that particular classroom. At the same time, if we want to understand how each teacher's students across a school building or district are performing, this view by instructor dashboard is going to show that average score by each one of the instructors. This can be helpful for teacher evaluations, for aligning even individualized professional development for your teachers, and then having the same ability to do so school building by school building across your district. So maybe there's 5 elementary schools that are taking some sort of benchmark, and you want to see how they perform against each other and compare and contrast. Easily done here from the overall results dashboard. Now, at the same time, while we want to understand how students are performing numerically against the assessment, it's just as important to identify how they're performing against the standards that were tagged directly within that individual assessment. So this is that example, right? There were 5 standards that were tagged in this particular assessment, and I can quickly understand how my students are tracking towards those learning targets. So as an example here, it's one thing for me as an individual teacher to identify that Carrie Barker is, maybe she scored an 87 out of 100. Great job, Carrie. At the same time, it's just as important for me to identify that she's still not meeting expectations against this USH5 standard, right? Now, once again, I'm identifying this in the LMS. I hop back in the course as the teacher. I pull in some individual reading targets or a video, any sort of learning objects that I want, and individually assign that directly to Kellie. Okay? Maybe as a PLC, we are identifying here that there are a number of students that are not meeting expectations against this particular standard. Well, let's hop in a group here as the CNI team or as that PLC group and really start to communicate with each other and talk about any sort of trends that we're identifying within the school and within the school district. Maybe with this view filter here, right, we find that Chris Benjamin students against this same standard are actually performing very well, right? Let's go into Chris's course as a PLC and identify what he's doing to teach along that standard and identify best practices and make them common throughout the entire district through the sharing of resources within the platform, right? So this is really bringing in AMP and aligning it directly to the LMS so that we can understand very quickly, but we can also respond as quickly as possible inside the place where the teaching and learning already exists. Okay, so that's really everything that I wanted to showcase. I know we've got about 15 minutes or so to run through some questions that I'm sure you guys have, been asking for the last half hour. One thing before we get to the questions that I do want to address is one key piece on our roadmap that we're really excited about, and that is multi-assessment reports. So for the upcoming school year, what you're going to see is the ability for you to actually select multiple assessments to review a report that showcases how students across all of those assessments are performing so that you can hopefully identify any trends that are happening over the course of that year or that semester. So for instance, this is just simply a report against this benchmark 2 assessment, but maybe I have a placement exam at the beginning of the year, a midterm, a benchmark, and a final. Right? And I want to identify how those students across those 4 assessments are performing and hopefully, right, see that upward trend in that response. We're going to be pushing that functionality so that you can do so directly within the platform. Another example of multi-assessment reports, taking this benchmark 2 and identifying how students this year performed versus the students last year. Right? These are just different ways that you can run those multi-assessment reports. But that's something that, as I mentioned, that we're pushing forward so that you can have access to that for the upcoming school year. So now what I'm going to do is actually open this back up to Bridget to identify any questions that need any answering at this point.
I think, Zach, one thing that would maybe be helpful to also talk about, and I mentioned this earlier, so I may have you just stay in the demo screen for a second. If I'm a teacher and I have given this assessment, what does that look like for me? Like when I go into my course, where is that? And like, how do I see results?
Yeah, awesome. That's a great question. So as an individual teacher, right, we talked about that assessment being filtered right within your course. What happens here, and this is just an example, what usually would happen is that this assessment, like a benchmark 1, right, this was already placed in the unit folder or in this lesson folder by Tracy Teacher. But what happens when an assessment is initially pushed into a course, it actually shows up right at the bottom of that course for the individual teacher to see. And then he or she can actually manipulate that and place it within the lesson folders or unit folders, chapter folders, however you kind of build out your course. I have the ability to kind of identify and push it within that lesson folder in an organized structure as I see fit. Now, when it comes to the actual assessment in itself, I have the ability, or your district can provide the teacher the ability to actually review the questions and review the actual assessment in itself. One thing that we're really excited about as well, and I didn't mention this, but we have a new live progress bar that allows for you to understand how your students are progressing through the actual assessment in itself. So it'll showcase to you where they are, particularly when you align that live progress report, where they are within the assessment, the progress that's been made over time, and the actual time spent on that particular assessment in itself. And then I'll have the ability, if provided, of course, to grade those manual questions or those manually graded questions as well as the individual teacher. Kellie, is there anything else that you'd like to make note to in regards to what the teacher sees and what they have the ability to manipulate?
I think one of the things that I think is worth mentioning, part of the interesting part of having AMP inside of Schoology is that, as you mentioned earlier, all of the assessments that are pushed live in the courses where kids are already doing their daily learning. So it's not like it's an unusual structure or students have to log in somewhere else. And I think that one of the things that is really kind of helpful also for teachers is the workflow of making the submissions enabled and publishing it are the exact same as they are for course assessments and similar to test quiz. So for teachers, at least, this is not something you have to do a ton of training on and how to give the assessment. And it's really the same process that they would be doing for another type of assessment. I think the other thing I would like to point out is that, based on the permissions that your district decides to enable for viewing that data, those reports that Zach was showing earlier, there is the ability to give teachers access to that data just for their students, but also know that anything that's been aligned to standards will also show up in the teacher's mastery dashboard. So it becomes part of the body of evidence that teacher has about students that goes into the mix with everything else that the students are being assessed on, so that it really helps give a better view to the classroom teacher about how that fits with other things, as well as giving your content coordinators, your assessment coordinators, a view that's a lot broader.
That's a great point to make. So just to kind of visualize exactly what Kellie was.
The mastery screen now. This is one of the reasons why we really tried to talk about the importance of that alignment all week, is whether you're using course assessments or AMP, the more that we can align, the more good data we get on how students are performing against the standards that we really want to measure. So the other thing I think we've had questions too about, in terms of AMP and the KDS question bank, Zach. When you went in, I think you showed math and ELA. Are there other subject areas that those test banks are available in, or is it just math and ELA?
So we provide questions through the partnership with KDS from the 4 core content areas of math, ELA, science, and social studies. Okay. And so I think right now there's about 50,000 questions that you would have the ability to select from. Over the course of the next 4 to 6 months, we're actually going to be doubling that in that partnership with KDS. So there will literally be 100,000 questions from those 4 content areas across multiple grade levels, K through 12, that the school districts will have the ability to identify and pull and make readily available inside of AMP, so that the assessment team actually has content that is readily available. To that point, I would like to make note as well that we do provide a lot of different importing functionalities as well. So there might be other software platforms where you have pre-built or your teachers have already built out a ton of questions from within those similar platforms. Whether it's QTI or Common Cartridge or other formatting import functionalities, we can pull in questions that your teachers have already built as well. What we don't want to do is have your teachers start all over that have been working for years, some of them, with content that they've been building out.
Yeah, it's probably worth mentioning too that if you do have existing test quiz questions, those can be converted to AMP question banks as well.
Great point.
So we also had some questions, Zach, about compatibility on mobile.
That's a great question, and I'm sorry I didn't even bring that up. But we're really, really excited to be providing our AMP platform, particularly from the students' end of completing the assessment, directly within a mobile experience. So every single question that I showcased from Sally's student as she was maneuvering through that assessment can also be done directly on any iOS or Android device. So I literally can be right on my iPad. And if you recall that highlight image question type where I was showcasing the map and drawing directly on that, I can have a stylus pen and do exactly the same thing on my iPad or my Samsung tablet. So that's a really exciting functionality that we're really happy about pushing from that mobile side of things for the students. But in terms of even grading and such, and things of that sort from the teacher's end. That can all be done from the mobile experience as well.
Okay, great. And then we also got a couple of questions, just sort of about like how banks work. Like, once those questions are in those item banks, can they be edited by other people? What's kind of is it like something that multiple people can work on at the same time? And if that happens, like what happens to the test itself?
So the questions themselves are siloed to the bank, and let's actually hop in one of those banks just to showcase a little bit instead of viewing this mastery report. So I'm going to hop back in as admin for a sec here and showcase one of these question banks. Okay, so these banks itself, I've kind of parsed it out by unit, right? But I know a lot of school districts that are using this, that are creating an organized approach to building banks within a folder-centric approach by standard, right? Or by chapter or week, what have you, right? So you can manipulate how you see fit, the building structure or the organizational structure of these banks. But within the bank, I have the ability to create all of the questions here. And when it comes to any sort of question that is in that draft status, everyone has the ability within that assessment team to edit that question. Okay, so if there are 5 folks within that English assessment team, all 5 of us have the ability to maneuver and edit the question. Once the question is pushed into an assessment and that assessment is distributed into a course, any changes that I make here within that assessment or within that question are not going to reflect, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Kelly, they're not going to reflect on that assessment in itself. Is that correct? I just want to make sure I'm answering that correctly.
So if a question gets edited, then basically anybody who had taken the assessment before will not see the question that changed because they've already taken the assessment. But anyone
Correct.
who takes the assessment from that point on would see the updated question.
Got it. So
So once if you find something that you need to fix, it will get basically fixed across all the assessments. It's just that the ones that have already taken it, they would still see the old question because they want to keep the data pristine because that was the question the kid had, if that makes sense.
Perfect. Thank you for clarifying that.
Yeah. The other question we got was, moving questions between, for like different courses. So let's say you had a question in biology A bank, and you wanted to actually send that to a different course. Is it pretty flexible, these test banks, in terms of how they work with assessments?
Yes. So I think, and I'm let's say instead of just a science team, we had a biology team, but they wanted to send a biology assessment or question, if you will, into an assessment within the physics team. Is that the question? I'm just trying to understand the question a little bit more. Can you repeat that, Kelly, or explain it?
Well, I think that the question was basically, it says, can questions be moved between question banks in different courses? So I think maybe what we need to maybe clarify here is that these folders and these these are basically like content area folders. They live under the resources area in Schoology. And if you have AMP enabled and you're part of an assessment team, you'll see that at the bottom of resources. So it's actually not tied to courses at all. Once you push an assessment to a course, then it lands there. But when you actually build the banks, those all live in these folders and they can be put into any assessment that you want. So I could take a question from, let's say, this English assessment or assessment bank. I might want to grab that question, let's say, for an assessment I'm writing in social studies, because it's a really good social studies question as well. It all depends on how you've structured your teams and how you're structuring where those folders live. But yeah, you can totally put a question from one bank onto an assessment for a different course. All right, so we've got about 4 minutes left. I do want to make sure that we highlight that the AMP product is a separate one from the Schoology LMS. And one of the things that I think we want to make sure that we highlight is that Bridget posted a link inside of the chat area, and it has a link so that if you wanted to request a demo, or something that you want to see on your own, you could totally see that in a way that's really built for the questions you have. Maybe you've got some unique needs or unique questions, so we can do a personalized walkthrough as well. It's likely you'll talk to Zach again because he's fantastic. And he's a great presenter, and he knows AMP super, super well. But Zach or someone like him would be happy to do a personalized walkthrough of that for you. All right, so as we kind of wrap up today, we already did questions, and so we have, I think we addressed most of those when we were in the chat. There's a couple that we're going to follow up on because we just have to get some clarification, just a couple of items. So if that's you, you'll be getting an email from one of us to clarify. And basically, one thing that we just want to reiterate is that the assessment process is really integral to instruction. And so hopefully you've kind of got some ideas this week on how assessments in Schoology can support all different types of assessments and purposes for those assessments, all under the big hope of trying to find out what do kids know, understand, and are able to do. Thanks for joining us this week. We've really had a great time, and we just want to also point out that this was part of our LEAP kind of brand. We do a monthly webinar on various topics, and we typically do those just on one Thursday of the month, the third Thursday. We happen to do a whole week this week because we wanted to really devote some quality time to the assessment building process and kind of all those nuanced conversations around that. But be paying attention to Schoology LEAP. If this has been useful for you, it's a great place to learn more about what we can do in the product and also hear from some of our great community members and ways that they're using Schoology. You'll see the hashtag at the bottom of the screen there that says Schoology LEAP. We also wanted to give a quick shout out and thank you to Zach for joining us today. That was awesome. And we hope everybody has a fantastic and fabulous Friday. All right. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.